Thank you very much. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. It's a great privilege to work with our colleagues here in An-Najah. Okay, the tectonics are really quite simple. Basically, the Arabian plate is moving northwards and to the east. Turkey sits on the Anatolian plate, and it is moving effectively southwards and to the west. So in between we have a fault that slips the Arabian plate against the Anatolian plate. And along the junction between these plates, we have a long thousands of years of earthquakes, many of them unfortunately very large. Throughout historical time, there have been large earthquakes in this region. For example, in 1138, there was a very large earthquake in the Antalya region. It's actually known as the Aleppo earthquake. Very devastating magnitude, probably not quite as big as the recent earthquake, but certainly more than magnitude 7. Other earthquakes along this junction between the Arabian and Anatolian plates has been active. So we have earthquakes in the 1500s for sure that we have very good historical records of. And in the last century or 2 centuries, there were a whole series of earthquakes from the northeast and the Van region in eastern Turkey through succeeding the whole way through this moving plate zone. And many of these earthquakes were over magnitude 7. So the recent earthquake is one of this series of earthquakes. It's not surprisingly large, though it's certainly one of the larger earthquakes in this sequence. Undoubtedly, this fault has experienced earthquakes of this size and bigger over historical time and certainly into prehistory. So events like this, unfortunately, are not unexpected, and this particular region had not experienced a big earthquake since around 1500. 1513, we know there was a big earthquake in this region, and it's likely that happened on the same fault as ruptured recently. So given that we know the plates are moving against each other, then we get a constant buildup of stress between these two plates. And in places where it has not been released for a long time, that stress gets very high. And then the slightest disturbance can trigger an earthquake, which then releases in seconds the stress that has built up over hundreds of years. And that's unfortunately, the reason why this earthquake was really not unexpected. Unfortunately, it was probably bigger than most of us were expecting, but not an unreasonably large earthquake for this area. This area gives big earthquakes, and unfortunately, it will give other big earthquakes in the future. That's a very good question. I'm a geophysicist who has worked on exactly this type of problem for the last 20 years or so. And I would like to be able to give a definitive yes or no to that. And the answer is that it's almost certainly that these two earthquakes were connected in some way because of the probability of this earthquake happening, which is not a very common event here, happening at around the same time as the first one. There are mechanisms that could be responsible for that, but it's not very clear. So my answer has to be, because these things happened, two unusual events happening very close in time would suggest that there could be a connection. We do understand physical processes which could explain that, but we don't understand them very well, and a lot more research is needed before we can be sure. Perhaps of more importance is the fact that the fault, the Dead Sea fault coming through very close to Nablus, is actually part of the same tectonic system. So the Arabian plate moving northwards makes eastern Palestine move northwards with respect to western Palestine, the same with Lebanon and Syria, and that continuous fault means that there is a significant earthquake risk in the area of Nablus. So that magnitude 4 earthquake is not unexpected again. The potential for a very large earthquake here is much less than it is in southern Turkey, but it is still not zero. So the issue of earthquake awareness in Nablus, in Ramallah, and other areas in Palestine is real, and the Palestinian people need to be very careful about the way in which they protect their citizens from future earthquakes. It's a very important and live issue for Palestine. Sure. Again, this is a really important issue, particularly now. The aftershocks are ongoing, and they will continue for probably for months to come. An American scientist said something very important, that the best sign that you're just about to have an earthquake is that you've just had one. Earthquakes always come in clusters. We know a lot about how these clusters form. So in this case, there was a magnitude 7.7, 7.8. They're still not completely accurate on that estimate, earthquake, and it was followed within about 9 hours with a magnitude 7.5 earthquake in the same area. That was an aftershock of the first one. And since then, there have been many magnitude 6 earthquakes and hundreds, thousands of smaller earthquakes that we are able to detect instrumentally. And these earthquakes will continue. They can be any size. And therefore, it's really important for responders in the area to be careful that they do not become complacent and think that the earthquake sequence is over. It is not over. And in general, aftershocks are mostly smaller than the main shock, but that's just a probabilistic fact. There can be large aftershocks, and some aftershocks are larger than the first event. So people should be very careful and should be very cautious in the way in which they approach damaged buildings. A really important issue which should be at the forefront of considerations of responding to the devastation in that area.